successively narrow down the selections, if you will. So let me show you kind of an application that actually has this working, and then we can go from there and show you exactly what we need to do in order to get there. So as an example, I have a add owner web page, and what I can do is first select a make, model, year of this vehicle that I want to assign to this particular owner. So let's say, for example, I select the make as Honda, then I have the ability to essentially select a specific model that relates to the make, in this case being Honda. So I can then select Honda Civic, and then my third drop-down gets enabled, which is the drop-down which shows year, and then I can select that this is 2007 or so. I can, of course, go back and say, okay, no, it's really Volvo instead, and now my other two drop-downs essentially change in order to reflect this value. So this will allow your end users to kind of narrow down the selection from a very long list by successively selecting each individual item. Obviously, this particular code customization is based on a make, model, year type of thing, but certainly you can do this for many different situations, and you can even increase or decrease the number of drop-downs. Instead of 3, as an example here, you can go to 4 or 5 or 6, or reduce it down to 2. We also have a code customization example in our knowledge base called multiple drop-downs that depend on each other that you can take a look at. That particular code customization deals with 2 items, basically. So this is the goal that we want to accomplish. When we go into IronSpeed Designer and initially generate a page, by default, IronSpeed Designer does not necessarily recognize or create multiple drop-downs automatically. So let me show you kind of how that page would look like. If you go back, and this is a page that I generated just a few minutes ago, take the same table, take the same child table, and when I generate a drop-down, by default, this is what IronSpeed Designer does. It adds a drop-down, gives you a please select it, and if I select a drop-down here, you will see repeated names like, all the Acuras and Audis and BMWs and so on. And the reason it is repetitive there is that even though I have different records for the different, let's say, BMW vehicles, right now the display foreign key as only displays the make for that. And if I select a model, it'll only display the model. And then if I select the year, it'll select the year for the display foreign key as, but it does not give me the full combination of the 3. I want a Honda Civic 2009 as an example in one shot. So that's what our goal is. Our goal is to essentially take this drop-down and make it into 3 drop-downs like I'm showing you over here, where I can select the make, model, and year. So just to re-summarize back again, once you select the first make, then you get to select the model, and then to select the year. So in order to do this thing, let's go back and kind of just get a background a little bit about, how does our database look like, and because that will help understand kind of the rest of the example over here. So our database looks like the following 3 tables that we have here. We have an owner table. We have the owner, and we have a vehicle type table. And then we have a many-to-many table which links owner and vehicle together. And that is called the owner vehicle table. So for example, a particular owner may have multiple cars or multiple vehicles. They may own 2 or 3 vehicles. And a particular vehicle may actually be owned by the same model, make, model, year, may actually be owned by multiple owners. That's why we need a many-to-many table called the owner vehicle table. So when you are on an add owner page, you will also see the child table of owner, in this case being the owner vehicle, and that's what we were looking at a minute ago. So obviously what we want to do is when we add new entries to the owner vehicle where we are specifying the vehicle type ID, we want the ability for the user to select this ID from the vehicle type by selecting first the make, then the model, and then the year, basically. So that's our goal. Now, just to look at how the database actually looks like, the table contains, IDs and then make, model, year. This is how our table looks like. Now, there are many ways of designing these tables. You could have the make in one table, a model in another table, and a year in a third table. We just decided to do it this particular way in this example. And if you want to do it another way, you can certainly change that and utilize that mechanism, and that's not a huge difference based on what we've got. What's our strategy? Our strategy in order to make this code customization is twofold. We need to make some layout changes, and we need to make some code customization changes. And what do the layout changes require? Well, the layout changes require us to essentially add the 2 extra drop-downs that we need. And in this case, we're going to add the make and model drop-down. And we have to then set the page properties for these new drop-downs. And we'll go ahead and do that. So let me actually go through and make these changes in Iron Speed Designer. Now, I have a good PowerPoint presentation which describes each one of these steps, go through one step at a time. I'm not going to use that, but you will have access to it at the end of this training so that you can follow along and do that on your own. So let's switch back to Iron Speed Designer. I'm also going to use a cheat sheet if needed over here in order to do that. Actually, I made a mistake over here. Let me actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and quickly create this application over here and do that. I apologize. I had originally created. Oh, there you go. Let me just create a new application very quickly here and show that to you. Owner, vehicle type, right? Owner vehicle. Okay, thank you for your patience in doing that. And so what we're going to do basically is when we have, while it builds, let me talk through the PowerPoint over here. What we want to do effectively is that we want to be able to add the make model drop-down controls using the code generation tags. If you're not familiar with code generation tags, what they are effectively are gen:\tags, and they get replaced when the code is generated in the ASPX file with standard .NET controls. So you are going to get ASP:\drop-down list. The reason we use code generation tags is to make it easy for you to specify them and to make it easy for you not have to worry about all of the different ASPX parameters like, run at equals server ID equals such and such thing and any other options that go along with the ASP tags. So this way it allows you to kind of just put a placeholder there and then also configure it using the page properties, and then immediately after that you can then essentially go ahead and generate and get the ASP:\drop-down dialog box. So there you have there you go. So it generated for me. Let me just close out these other web pages over here. And I was looking at the add owner page, and sure enough, it's the same drop-down that we are seeing over here. So what I want to do is I want to go to the add owner page. And if you look at the add owner page over here, you're seeing the owner information over here, and then there is an owner vehicle, and by default there is one drop-down for vehicle type ID. So what we want to do is we want to add 2 additional drop-downs. And what we can do effectively is, first and foremost, we can display the HTML quick view at the bottom. So what will happen is a small window that will show up at the bottom over here. And then when I select a particular cell, it gives me the contents of that cell at the bottom here. This way, when I'm adding code generation tags or so on, I don't have to kind of worry about all of the area that, all of the code that revolves around all of the HTML here. I can just focus in on or zoom in on only a small section of it and utilize that. So now what I need to do is essentially add 2 additional field values over here in addition to the vehicle type ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat over here instead of typing it. I'm going to simply copy it from my instruction sheet over here. I'm going to add the make and model in addition to the vehicle type over here. So I'm just going to press some enter key over here, add a couple of additional fields, and that's about it basically. So if I do this thing now, what will happen is if I click back over here, you will see the make and model have been added. But because IronSpeed Designer does not know what type it is, it just shows you as a unbound control. And then what I need to do is actually go bind each one of them individually. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click the make control over here, and it brings up essentially the bindings tab for me on the page properties dialog box. And for the time being, I'm going to map it to the vehicle type ID here so that all of the code is going to be generated for that. And then what I'm going to do is modify that code. So what I want to do is bind it to vehicle type ID, go change the display to a drop-down list for this particular control, and press the OK button. And there you have it. My drop-down is now, is next time when I build and run, it's going to have another drop-down. And I'm going to do the same thing with model. Select the vehicle type ID, put a display, drop-down, and there you have it. I'm going to save this file. And in order to make it clear, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this thing to year, so that this way it makes it much easier for me to actually understand when I'm writing the code. So I'm going to click, right mouse click, select the menu, rename menu, and then change this to year. There you have it. So I've changed this now, and you notice that even in here, IronSpeed Designer automatically changed the field value to year. And at this point in time, if I were to build and run, what will happen is you will see 3 drop-downs all showing the same information at this point in time, because we have not done a code customization in order to limit those drop-downs to their respective information, either the make, the model, or the year. So at this point in time, we have only done half of the customization, and we need to add and do some more. So notice you will see the make, model, year, and all of them will contain the same items. So you've got all of the makes here, all of the makes over here, and all of the makes over here. And our next step is to actually go and filter these down through a code customization in order to only show the specific make, model, year. So how do we do that? Let me flip through the PowerPoint over here. Like I said, our PowerPoint shows you, kind of walks you each one of the steps here, and then shows you exactly how you set them. Then change it to the drop-down. And now we come to the code part of the strategy. Well, what do we need to do in order to essentially make this happen in the code? Well, first and foremost, what we need to do is that when the user selects a particular make, what we want to be able to do is call the server back up using what's called an auto postback, using a postback. And what this will do is it will show you effectively it'll get control over to the server, and then what you can do is then populate the second drop-down, in this case the model drop-down. So let's say if I selected Honda as the make, then the model gets, the model drop-down needs to be filled in based on the first selection. And in order to do that, I have to call the server back again and handle that event in order to populate that drop-down. And I can do that using what's called the auto postback property. So what I want to do is for each one of these drop-downs, I want to essentially set the auto postback property to true so that we are called. And then the auto postback property, when it is set to true, calls a specific event or makes an event. And that event is called the selected index change event for drop-downs as well as list boxes. So what we want to do is handle the selected index change and then populate those drop-downs. And the way we were going to populate those drop-downs is to call the populate method that was pre-created, but we may need to make some modifications to do that. Now keep in mind that in the case of the last drop-down, the year, we actually don't need to set the auto postback property for that. And the reason why we don't need to do that is because when you change the year, there is no additional work that we need to do on the page. That is the last step that the user needs to do in selecting a particular vehicle, and so there is no need for doing an auto postback. That's the first part of the code strategy. And the second part of that is that for each drop-down, and this includes not just the make, model, but also the year, we will need to write the populate methods and to restrict the values in these drop-downs based on the earlier selections. Like, for example, if it is a model, we only need to load values for the selected make. So that's what we want to do. Let's do one step at a time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy each one of the functions. But actually, before I do that, let me talk about the background information of what code we want to change here. If you look at a particular page, there are a number of classes that we generate. Like, for example, if you've got a table control, we will generate a page class, a table control class, and a table control row class, one that corresponds to each row here. So as an example, on the lower left-hand side, you see a show table page where there are different classes that correspond to the page, the record table control and the table control row. The changes that we're going to make are going to be at the table control row class. And the changes that we want to make effectively are two changes. One is override the control init method, and we need to then also override the populate method. Those are the two changes that we're going to do at the record control level. So let's go ahead and make those changes. I'm going to again bring back my cheat sheet over here, which you will have access to as soon as this webinar is over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my init method, and I'll show you and I'll walk through what exactly that I am going to do here. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio. I just most of the time make the changes in Visual Studio. It makes it a little bit easy for me. You can certainly do that within IronSpeed Designer as well. But Visual Studio is great at some of the code customizations here. So let's make those changes. Specifically, we talked about the kind of changes we want to make, and it would be at the table control row class. If you look at a particular page and this code behind file and the controls file, you will see two sections, section 1 and section 2. Section 1 is where you need to place your customizations, and they will never be overwritten. Section 2 is what we generate, and we will override that every time you press the build button. So make sure that you do not make modifications in section 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand section 1. And we talked about making the changes at the table control row. Happens to be the first class. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to paste the function that I copied from my Word document. And let's walk through that thing. So this is the init method. What we are doing here is we are selecting the post back. We're setting two of the fields, the make and the model, and we're setting the auto post back flag to true. And what this will do is it will tell .NET, an application, that you essentially should be called back whenever a user modifies a particular value. The next two lines add a handler. They say that, hey, in order to handle the selected index change, please call this function, the function being make underscore selected index change. This is, by the way, standard .NET stuff. So if you're familiar with Microsoft .NET Framework and how that works, this is exactly how that works. You essentially add a handler with the address of a particular function, and that function is going to be called whenever the selected index change event is fired. And then finally, we essentially enable the make drop-down, but disable the model and the year. And the reason we want to disable them is that unless and until the user selects the make, we don't want the user to be able to have access to the model or the year. So once we have done that, the next step for us is actually to define the selected index change methods. And again, let me copy the selected index change methods over here. Let's look at the first one, which is going to be for the make. And let me paste it, and I'll walk you through. It's a very simple function. When the user selects a particular make, let's say the user selects Honda, what do we want to do? Well, first and foremost, what we want to do is we want to enable the model drop-down. Because the user now selected the make, we want to be able to now give the option to the user to select a model as well. And then what we want to do is we want to populate the model drop-down. And how do we populate it? Well, the way we're going to populate it is we are going to make sure that we read the data from the database specific to the make that was selected in the earlier drop-down. And I'll walk through that in a minute over here. but this is sufficient for the time being, which is what it does is to handle selected index change. Similarly, let's go through and handle the selected index change for the model, and it's going to look exactly the same thing with the slight change. In this particular case, what we're going to do is when the model is selected, we're going to enable the next drop-down in the sequence. In this case, it being the year. We're going to enable that, and then we're going to call the populate year drop-down list method that goes along with that. If you want to pre-initialize a value for these drop-downs, you can change this from nothing to a particular value. Otherwise, if we don't want anything to be pre-initialized, if you just wanted to say please select, you would need to essentially pass nothing. The 100 here simply means that how many items to display in the drop-down before you display what's called a large list selector. Because if there are a million items, you don't want to populate the drop-down with all million items basically. Okay, so we're done with the selected index change. Now what we need to do is we need to write the 3 different populate methods. One for the make, one for the model, and one for the year. And again, let me copy each one of the make, model, and year populates, and then we'll walk through the code over here. So I'm going to cut and paste over here. Let me go back to the top and walk you through this. This is the populate make drop-down list. Now, we did not call this explicitly from anywhere. This is not called from either my init, or it's not called from the make and the model, because the populate make drop-down list is going to be called automatically when the page is loaded, because that's the default generation that we are doing. That's what IronSpeed Designer does. But in our case, we're going to override it, because if you remember, what happened was we populated all of the makes based on these things. We don't want these things to be repeated. We want just one entry for Acura, one for Audi, one for BMW, and so on. So how do we do that? That's what the goal of the populate make drop-down list is. First and foremost, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially read records from the database. And let me actually jump into the middle, and then I'll walk back up over here. We're going to call a function which from the data access layer that IronSpeed Designer has generated for you called getRecords. And we're going to call that on a particular table, in this case, the vehicle type table. And this particular method, getRecords, takes 4 arguments: a where clause, an order by, the page number, and the maximum number of items to return. So what we want to do basically is read 100 records at a time, and then populate our list from that 100 based on a where clause, based on an order by. Now, in general, in the case of this particular instance, we want to essentially read all of the records in the vehicle type table. So in this particular case, my where clause is going to be nothing or empty effectively, and it is actually specified by a generated function called create where clause underscore make dropdown list, which by default is going to be an empty where clause that comes in. And that's okay. We'll just reuse that thing. We're going to modify the order by clause. And the reason we're going to modify the order by clause is that we want it to be pre-sorted based on make. How are we going to modify that? We're going to create a new order by clause, and we're going to add the column, in this case the column being make, and then we're going to sort this in ascending order. So this way, all of my Audis are read in first, and then the BMWs, and then the Buicks, and so on. So I can populate this thing fairly easily. Then I do some amount of housekeeping. I clear the make drop-down before I start out with any previous values. And then we're going to set the page number to 0. We're always going to use a 0-based thing. And then what we do is we read the records from the database, 100 at a time, which is the one that we passed in as the max items as the parameter here. So we read the first 100. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through for each record in the records that have been received. We're going to create a new list item, and we're going to fill that up with the make for both the arguments of the list item. The list item is a standard .NET list item for a drop-down list, and it has a name-value pair, a name being the name that you need to display, and the value, the internal value. Normally, the value is like an ID number, for example. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use both the name and the value would be the make. Excuse me. And this way, what it allows me to do is that when I retrieve the make for this selection, when I'm populating the model dropdown, it allows me to essentially use the name of the make in order to filter the model dropdown appropriately. We're going to do one more test over here. We're going to say, hey, if this particular item is already in our list, we don't want to add it. So if it's not contained, then we want to add this particular item to the drop-down list. So that's basically it. We increment the page number, and we continue to fill this record in while we haven't reached the maximum number of items in there. So if there are 50 Audi records, we populate it once with the one name Audi, then go back, read the next 50, populate it, and keep on going that until we fill the drop-down maximum number of 100 entries in the drop-down. That's about it for the make drop-down. The remainder of the code, basically what it does, it sets a selected value. Normally, if you do not pass in a selected value, this entire if statement is skipped, so I won't go through that in this detail. Finally, we do some other housekeeping stuff. We add a please select statement as the first item. And then what we want to do is we want to clear up the model and we want to clear up the year. Now this code is not important the first time around, but let's say, for example, if I select the make, then I select the model, then I select the year, and then I come back and modify let me see if I can show you that. If I select the make, well, I don't have this example. Oops, there you go. So okay, so I went to the owner and I selected add owner. So here's the scenario that we're trying to handle over here. I select a particular make, and I selected a model, and I select a particular year. Then when I go back, I want to go back and let's say the user happens to change this to a different make. Then what we want to do is we want to clear up this list and then repopulate it, right, with for this particular make, and then also disable this thing. So this is what this housekeeping job does. Basically, it disables and clears the other drop-downs when the make is initially initialized again, clears the model, clears the year, sets it to enable to false. So what we have done now is we have populated the make with only each make being only added once to that drop-down. If I were to run it at this point in time, let me save it, and if I were to run it, what will happen is basically my make is drop-down will only display the unique makes, but my model and my year, we haven't made any changes to that, so it'll continue to function in the same way. So notice what happens here. I've got the make, and I've got all of those values over here, and then I've got the model and the year, which are not necessarily enabled until I select that. There you go. Now, Mercedes, I select this, but now this will contain all of the makes still because I haven't made any customizations at this point in time. So let's go back. By the way, the reason why this shows text please select over here as opposed to the underlying value is because we want to get this value from a resource file. And the resource, and because if you are using a different language, let's say French or German or something like that, you want the text please select to be in that native language. Now, the reason that it shows txt colon please select is because when I copied and pasted code, I made the app name training, so I need to make this to my app 8, and it will then correctly identify it from the my app 8 regex file. So at this point in time now, I have done with filling the make. Now I need to fill the model dropdown. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the model function over here, and we'll walk through it just like what we did with the make. And again, I need to change this to my app 8, I think, right? So let's just go ahead and take care of that right now. And let's go back and look at this thing. Now, my model dropdown is going to work slightly differently. The only difference primarily is that when I try to do get records, I'm going to call a where clause. What does the where clause contain? Well, it contains a default where clause for the model dropdown. But in addition to that, I'm going to add another where clause. And in this case, I'm going to say and it with the make being whatever the selected value from the make dropdown is. So this way, I'm only going to read for the selected make. I'm only going to read the records for the selected make. So if I selected Acura, then I'm only going to get all of the models related to Acura. And the rest of the code will be effectively the same. This time I want to order by model name as opposed to make. And I do the same housekeeping. I clear the model, and then I select the page number to 1. And then I do the same exact loop, basically. I read the records from the table. I then go through and create. This time, instead of the make, I'm going to use the model for each one of the list items. And I will only add the models if they are not already in the list item, basically. And then that's basically, it's going to remain exactly the same thing. We're also going to skip the selected part because I haven't specified any selected part. And then we add the please select for the model dropdown because when I'm populating, I have to repopulate all of the values, including the please select. And then finally, the last step is I'm going to continue to disable the year dropdown. I'm going to insert the please select, even though as the name there, but I'm going to set the enable flag to false so that I don't see this at all here. Okay, so that's the model, and if we were to run this now, let's look at it and see how the running looks like here. What will happen is that I haven't done the year part, so I'm going to only show the make and the model at this point in time. So you will notice that the make gets populated and the model will get populated once I select the make. Add owner vehicle. I go select a particular one. Let's say I select Nissan. My make gets selected to Altima, for example. Then my year gets populated, but since I haven't done it, it still contains all of the duplicate values that go around with that particular value there. So now the last piece of code customization I need to do here is to now populate the year. We'll do the same thing. We'll cut and paste and walk through. So I'm going to now cut and paste that. And again, my populate will be very similar to what I have seen earlier. And just like what I've done earlier, I'm going to do get records, pass in the where clause. But this time, the where clause now contains two and statements, one for the make, one for the model. And we're going to retrieve the selected value from the make dropdown and the selected value from the model dropdown as the basis for our where clause. So if I selected Nissan, that's going to be added as the make over here for the where clause, and it's going to say make equal Nissan and model equal whatever the Nissan model that I selected in my thing, and the rest of it effectively works exactly the same thing. I'm going to this time order based on, oh, this code has a slight mistake. This should probably be ordered by year. Okay, we'll fix that. And then we clear the items. We set the page number to 0. We repeat the same do loop basically. And in this case, notice one difference that we are going to do. We're going to add a list item. We're going to add the display to be year, but we're going to make one difference over here. Instead of making the value year as well, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially make that the ID from the table. So if the row ID is 348, we want to essentially have the internal value to be 348 because that is what is going to be stored in the database, not the actual text of the year or the make or the model. So that's the reason why we want to essentially create a list item with the year as the display string but the ID as the value. The rest of the code is exactly the same. I want to make sure that I only add unique year items. Now, most likely they will be unique already because it's unlikely that you will have the same make, model, year duplicated in your database. So this is not technically necessary, but we'll just leave the code as is. Same thing, I'm going to do selected value. I'm going to skip that section at this point in time because I don't have a selected value. Finally, I need to just basically insert the please select, and I need to change to my app 8. And then I'm going to simply disable. There are no other things to disable, and I'm done. Let's go back to IronSpeed Designer, build and run, and let's see how the code, how the page actually looks like. So after this thing, I'm going to take questions. So if you've got questions, please line them up for Brooke, and I'm going to start answering them here. So if you go back to the owner, notice what happens now. I have an opportunity to select a Nissan. I can select Altima, and then I have the ability to select a particular year. If I go back, change it to Toyota, I get a new drop-down. I can select Camry, and then I can select a particular year. If I want to go back and select maybe Yaris, then my drop-down actually changes. There's a selected value issue over here. For some reason, it shows Toyota over here. But I have 2000 and 2008. If I go select Tundra, looks like it defaults to this. So I must have some minor issue over here in the selected value. But you can see kind of the year that is getting populated. Somehow the selected value is getting set to the name. So there's probably some minor issue in the actual code customization. But I'll take a look at that and fix that for the next time around. But you can see exactly how the make, model, year is working. In this example, I select the make, model, and the year. Okay, so let me take some questions over here. SJ is asking, kindly note in this case that while pre-select is inactive, the large list selector is